Thank you all so much for being here. We are here tonight to hear from our candidates about housing affordability in our growing city. My name is Abby Tatkow, and I'm the chair of the Austin Housing Coalition. We are a nonprofit coalition of affordable housing developers, housing and policy experts, and other interested organizations and businesses who support the preservation and development of safe, affordable housing for Austin residents. We are honored to be partnering today with the Austin chapter of the American Institute of Architects and Housing Works Austin to dive into some of the most pressing housing issues our city continues to face. Exacerbated by the pandemic, we have seen our community struggle with persistent issues around affordability, displacement, and homelessness. And we've also seen many of our elected leaders step up in creative and meaningful ways, like by addressing COVID rent relief funding gaps in our general fund budget, eliminating parking minimums, allocating Project Connect funding for anti-displacement, and by supporting affordable housing developments in parts of town that have not historically seen these investments. We are inspired by these efforts and are eager to hear from incumbent and future leaders on further housing priorities and innovation. This November, we have 5 council districts and the mayoral seat on the ballot. And today we will have the opportunity to hear from most of these candidates on their housing priorities. Before we jump into the programming, I want to say a few thank yous to some of the folks who made today possible. We hope you will enjoy the beautiful Assembly Hall and food courtesy of the RISA Foundation and drinks sponsored by AAA Austin. This event came together quickly and with the help of committed volunteers from Habitat for Humanity, Osta Industries, Front Steps, East Austin Conservancy, AIA Austin, Housing Works Austin, ICC, Boomers Collaborative, Forgecraft, Shams Gannon, and Urban Foundry architecture firms, Structure Development, Broadleaf Community Consulting, and many others. For the next 3 hours, we have arranged district and mayoral specific moderated panels with the help of some of the questions received from your RSVPs. Please note that due to time constraints, we will not be taking additional audience questions. Lastly, out of respect for our candidates, we ask that you remain quiet in the main hall while we are recording. We ask that for those who are here to learn, that anyone intentionally disrupting the panels will be asked to leave. Please do not hesitate to socialize more freely in the entry room. Again, thank you so much for attending this evening, and now we're going to kick things off with a moderated discussion with our incumbent candidate for District 2, Councilmember Vanessa Fuentes.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you all. So my name is Vanessa Fuentes. I serve as the Executive Director of Housing Works Austin, and I will be moderating the conversation for the District 2 race. Mr. Reynolds, who's the other candidate running in the race, was not available, so he could not make it. But of course, we're joined by Councilmember Fuentes, who is currently serving in that district and is up for re-election as well. So we're very excited to have her here. I'll just honestly open it up with a more general question and understanding. Why did you decide to live where you live, your neighborhood, your district, and how does that influence your beliefs on housing or inform how you advocate on certain housing policy?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for hosting this Hot Takes on Housing Forum. I love it. My name is Vanessa Fuentes, and I'm proud to represent District 2 on Austin City Council. I've had the privilege and honor to represent Southeast Austin for the last 4 years. And part of, like many Austinites, what brought me to our city was that I came here to attend the University of Texas at Austin and have really found a home here in our city. And when it came to time to buy a home, it was important to me that I lived in an area that reflected the values that I have as a Latina, as a first-generation college graduate, and that I was in a community that looked like me, that I knew that I could raise my family in, and so that's what brought me to the 4-4, as we like to call it, in Southeast. And I've been, thrilled with the community and really have grown, such a part of it, and know that a lot of what drives District 2 is a story of resilience. My community has been affected by 2 historic and catastrophic floods over the last decade. So when we talk about disasters, and especially during the pandemic, what we have found is that those events do not affect everyone proportionately, and that it is our marginalized and particularly our communities of color who bear the brunt of those disasters. So as someone who's been part of Southeast Austin for a while now, these policies, particularly around housing, are very meaningful for me because it's also the area we have the largest concentration of Latino families and Latino homeowners. And I truly see home ownership as a pathway of building wealth, as a pathway of addressing that the racial wealth divide. And so it's also an area where we have a lot of young families who are home building.
A really exciting sort of way to think about it. And you're right that home ownership within that district is so critical, and wealth building is a critical part of that conversation. And of course, part of that conversation is how do we look at things like gentrification and displacement. And we know that our city has an issue with displacement. We're seeing that in different parts of our city, and District 2 certainly feels that pressure in a lot of different places, including some of those homeowners. So what are your thoughts on this, and what strategies or policies do you feel like can really address this, not just for homeowners, but tenants as well?
That's right. You know, we often talk about the housing crisis that we have, but I also like to point out that we have a displacement crisis as well. We are seeing more and more of Austinites having to move out of our city. They're getting pushed out of our city because they can't afford to live here. They can't afford rent, and they certainly can't afford some of our housing prices. And so when I think about what more can and should the city of Austin be doing when it comes to displacement prevention, what is really important to me, and an initiative that I was proud to lead on, is the creation of the Displacement Prevention Community Navigator Program. This is a program that is really focused on the community. It trains up people from the areas that are at risk or vulnerable to displacement. It equips them with the skills and the knowledge needed where they're able to go into these areas that are vulnerable and provide resources and access to information. Because that's really what I have found to be one of the biggest challenges, that people don't know. They don't know about the programs that the city of Austin offers. They don't know about the home repair program available for our seniors, the down payment assistance program, the rental assistance that we just made permanent with this year's budget, which is a huge win for us. And so making sure that people at least are aware of it and then helping them navigate the system is another critical piece. It is really hard, especially if English is not your first language, in learning how to navigate our system. So those community navigators have proven successful, and I'm thrilled to see that we had a great pilot program, great first year, and it's going to continue that work. So I think that is just one way that we can continue to combat displacement.
You know, that's great. And I do want to thank you for championing that program, and for all of your colleagues who have been working to extend it. Those are the kind of programs that we need to stabilize a lot of our neighbors here in the city. You know, this is particularly true for District 2. I really felt like this was a question that makes sense to ask, particularly the District 2. Like you said, resilience and the environmental concerns, particularly flooding, are really critical within District 2. And as we're expanding these housing opportunities throughout our city, there is a genuine concern among some folks on the impacts of flooding and stormwater infrastructure, and how do we manage that? And really, nowhere else in the city is this an issue bigger than it is in District 2. So I guess if you can respond to that and how you see that we address this, would love to know your thoughts on that.
Yes, certainly when we think about our next climate bond that we pursue and consider as a city, for me, what's going to be top of mind is ensuring that we have a significant investment and allocation for our drainage infrastructure. We have to ensure that we continue to improve, especially at an area level, that we make those improvements that are needed. So that's going to be top of mind for me, and one way that we continue to strengthen the resilience of our community. The other way is through green infrastructure, expanding our tree canopy, particularly in Southeast Austin on our Eastern Crescent. We have the heat isle effect, and so we know that certain communities are subject to more intense heat, and when you're having stronger and more often heat waves, it's going to be important that we have more, that we expand our tree canopy. And another cool thing that I'm actually really excited about is that we have a pilot program going on in District 2 right now that's about cool pavement. So we are looking at cooler pavement and seeing how the differences that makes in our temperatures. And I've already had some preliminary analysis was shared with me just this week, and we're already seeing a big difference. So I think, you know, continuing the spirit of innovation when it comes to our resilience and to how we combat climate change is going to be another area that we can really lean in on. And council is well on its way in considering that work.
One of the things that really comes to mind as part of this conversation is, and that's sort of the premise of the question, is that this allows us to continue with our increasing housing opportunities, doing the work that I know council has continued to sort of do, while also ensuring that we are taking care of the environment and looking at climate change. I guess the next question would really be looking at how do you see the recent changes to the land development code? And this includes home and the work around eliminating parking minimums, equitable transit-oriented development overlays. Where do you sort of fit in the work that has happened on council? What do you think about it? How do you think it intersects with some of the priorities for District 2?
One thing that I'm really proud of for this council is our work on ensuring that we're making it easier to build different types of homes all throughout our city. And what I know about District 2, if you ever drive through our Dove Springs neighborhood, is that we have a lot of duplexes. Duplexes are very common in our area. They're beautifully integrated in our neighborhoods. So the thought of having multiple homes on a lot was one that I knew wouldn't be a foreign concept for my community, it'd be one that is embraced. So to me, I think having those changes initiated at a larger scale citywide, we're going to be able to see some significant progress on our efforts to make housing more affordable in our city. And for District 2, what I'm particularly leaning in on is looking at how do we ensure that, as I mentioned earlier, we have the largest concentration of Latino family homeowners. How do we ensure that we're connecting them with access to capital, that we're making it easier for them to be able to age in place? The efforts that we have around our ADU policy are significant as well, and I want to make sure that we don't have any unnecessary administrative hurdles or additional barriers. We want to ensure that our families are able to build that ADU on their lot so that they can either have their kids move in or be able to expand their family.
That's a really critical conversation to have on how do we sort of continue to make opportunities for more people, but also ensure that folks who are there today get to benefit from the changes that are happening. And I really want to appreciate, again, the work that council has done on these issues. It's a little bit of a slightly change in track, but still, of course, keeping within the hot topics on housing. What do you see as some of the primary causes of homelessness? And what are the most effective interventions required to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring?
Yeah, addressing homelessness is one of our top challenges. It's not unique to our city. It's a challenge that is common in many of our larger cities. It's a societal issue as well. One thing that I have found in visiting encampments in my district and having conversations with our unhoused neighbors is just how easy it is to fall into homelessness. One particular conversation that I had, they talked about how they needed eye surgery. And they were trying to get help, and they just couldn't figure out how to navigate our already complex healthcare system. And they missed their eye doctor appointment, they missed their surgery, and of course they had a worsening condition with one of their eyes. And as a result, they lost their job. And once they lost their job, they lost their home. And then now they've been living in one of our parks for over 2 years. And it was, once you're at that stage, it is really, really difficult to provide stability through housing and through support services. So for me as a policymaker, what is really important is that we continue to invest on the prevention, ensuring that we continue to ensure that folks are in their homes, that they have access to good paying jobs, and they have the necessary supportive services. They have the health care that's needed, and they have someone that can help them navigate the health care. City Council, we've made some really significant strides when it comes to addressing homelessness. We've injected over $100 million into our homelessness ecosystem over a number of years, and we are just now really seeing the progress on those investments that the City of Austin and Travis County have done. We have over 1,000 new permanent supportive housing homes coming online in the next year. And it's going to be important that we keep up the pace, that we ensure that we continue to build affordable housing, that we continue to work with our partners like Central Health and Integral Care in the county, because the City of Austin can't do it alone. We really need all of our sectors on board, including philanthropy, including the business community and our faith community. It's a complex challenge. I've been very, very fortunate to chair the Public Health Committee and know that is addressing homelessness is top of mind and one that we'll continue to push for, particularly on the housing front.
I'll just ask a sort of follow-up question to that, which is, you mentioned you do chair the health committee and the work that the city has been doing in partnership with Travis County, and I know there was a lot of work around the diversion center and a lot of those. Can you talk a little bit about those efforts that you all are making as well to really integrate that housing and health aspect when it comes to issues like homelessness?
Yeah, the mental health diversion is one that we're partnering with Travis County on, is ensuring that we have more intense care available for individuals who need access to mental health services and treatment. Right now, our Travis County Jail is serving as the #1 place, and we know that that is not the best place, and we know that we can do better for our community. I've toured the mental health diversion in Harris County, and I've seen what they have available. And with the work that we're doing at the county has just started, so we're still on the front end of that. It'll provide us anywhere between 20 to 25 beds, and just to level set, that is a very small amount for the need that we have in our city. So we're going to have to continue to invest in mental health services, continue to ensure that we have the necessary treatments in place, and that we have housing available as well.
And with the caveat that, of course, it is a national model that people are looking at, and yes, it's small, but we're really piloting something really exciting and creative here in our community. So again, big kudos to everybody. Last question. I know I'm going to run out of time at some point soon, but over the past decade, the city has really invested hundreds of millions of dollars to subsidize income-restricted housing through bond programs, the Housing Trust Fund, and various other mechanisms. I guess, what is your perspective on how effective these investments have been in creating this deeply affordable housing through, for example, bonds, et cetera? And what changes would you like to see to that as well?
Oh, it's been incredibly effective, and it's certainly an area that we have to continue to press forward. I mentioned the amount, over 1,000 new permanent supportive homes coming online over the next year. Takes a couple of years to build those homes, so we are certainly going to have to continue that investment. And our community has supported it. Austinites continue to vote in support of affordable housing bonds. My district right now, we are building the largest community land trust community in the city, is being built in District 2. And I know that has been such a popular model for us, and popular engagement from our community in wanting to see that into fruition. And I think it's, our investments when it comes to creating and preserving affordable housing, particularly along the Project Connect line, is going to also be another priority for our city. But I will say those investments matter. They make a difference. I can't think of another city that is investing like we are. We are leading on that front. Truly, we are innovators on that end. And I think at one point there was a tweet out there that called our city council one of the most pro-housing city councils that we've ever seen, certainly in Austin, but even nationally. And I'm really thrilled to have had the opportunity to serve on this city council. I'm asking my community for 4 more years, and I hope to earn their support.
And not a better place to stop. And I do want to say 15-minute goes really fast. I could do this all day. Of course, we have a lot of folks waiting here to hear. I do want to thank you so much, Councilmember, and for being here, for your commitment to your district and the work that you're doing. And thank you for being here and engaging with this group of people on seeing how do we sort of move our housing opportunities and our housing commitments forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. You'll have a good night.
We have our next panel coming up, and as folks are walking up, hopefully, y'all will sort of mingle and make sure that you're getting some snacks and everything else, but we'll continue as people walk up.
How about a hand for the newly named Executive Director of Housing Works Austin, Mr. Avesas. Hardest working man in housing. No, we had a. Well, great. Well, we'll now move on to our next panel. My name is John Michael Cortez, and I have the honor and the privilege of serving on the board of directors of Housing Works Austin and chairing our Policy and Advocacy Committee. And we're now moving on to our forum with our candidates for mayor of Austin. And very similar, you'll see a very similar format the rest of the evening. We have 3 questions that we're going to ask of each of the candidates in different order. And time allowing, we may jump into another question or two. But since we have a lot of candidates to hear from, we'll go ahead and jump into it. So the first question that I'll have, and we'll start on this end and go that way if that's okay with y'all. And you can use this as a brief opportunity to also introduce yourself quickly as part of answering this question. And we'll start with Mr. Greco here. Why did you decide to live where you live, and how does that influence your beliefs on housing or inform how you advocate for certain housing policies or reforms? So, Mr. Greco.
I'm Doug Greco, running for mayor of Austin because I think City Hall needs to work for all Austinites. I came here in the late 90s. I was a high school teacher on the east side at what was Johnston High School for 5 years. Got involved in community organizing through Education Austin and Austin Interfaith, and led Central Texas Interfaith for 12 years. Was also the chief of staff to State Rep Gina Hinojosa, and worked in the LGBT movement with the largest statewide LGBT organization in the country. I grew up in the coal region of Pennsylvania. I just want to make two points here. Close-knit community, but economically devastated when the mines had shut down before I was born. My mom bought the house I grew up in for $30,000 in 1985 to raise 3 boys as a single mom. She sold it in 2008 for $15,000. It had lost half its value. And at least she was able to buy a home. There's lots of folks that can't because they've been discriminated against or don't have the opportunity to. But she was humiliated that she had lost half her value. So my work has been primarily fighting for affordable housing, rental and mortgage assistance, hundreds of millions of dollars in housing for those experiencing homelessness, affordable housing, and rental and mortgage assistance. Most of my time in Austin, I've rented. But there's twice that I have, most of the time I've rented on the east side. I owned a condo for a few years on the east side by ACC Riverside. And then in 2021, I went to buy again, and I couldn't afford a single-family home, in detached single-family home with a yard. And most of the places I wanted to live had gotten too expensive. I didn't want to move into a neighborhood where I would displace or contribute to gentrification. I bought a condo off of Mopac and William Cannon, 2-bedroom condo, because I wanted to live in the city. But I always have felt like I have lived on the edges of neighborhoods. And even in my last few years with Interfaith, making a really good salary, I still could not afford, and I probably will never be able to afford, a detached single-family home with a yard in Austin. And those neighborhoods are beautiful neighborhoods. West Creek, I love walking around there. But I think they should be accessible to more people, and we should have more housing options so we can expand the number of folks that live in our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Thank you. Former Councilmember Tovo, same question, and I'll just advise you all we have a timekeeper here. We're trying to limit the responses to about 2 minutes. You did a good job. 2 minutes per person per question. So, Kathy, if you'll go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Tovo, served as Mayor Pro Tem and also as council member for 3 terms, and happy to be here with you. I moved here in 1991 to go to graduate school at UT and lived in a bunch of different places. They all ended up in District 9, so when we made this transition to district-based systems, it was fun to represent a district that I had lived in for decades. I live currently in a neighborhood just north of the campus, of UT campus, and moved there in 2009 rather. I had previously lived in Bolden Creek. I had moved into a house that my then husband, still husband, but we no longer, we're in the process of divorcing. but that he had owned, and we moved north when we were getting ready to adopt my second daughter, because we lived in a house that was, we loved our neighborhood, we loved the house, but it was something that worked a lot better for folks without kids than it did with kids. In the time that I lived in Bolden Creek, I worked to help support the PTA and the Campus Advisory Committee at a time when AISD was trying to close schools, including Becker Elementary and Oak Springs Elementary. And that's really when I got involved in citywide issues. I was trying to understand why that was happening in a neighborhood that was so popular and was experiencing so much interest. And I learned that the reason was that so much of the housing was being redeveloped, replaced by higher dollar housing, and so many of the families that had lived in Bolden Creek, which was a working class, middle class neighborhood for so many years, were being pushed out. And that got me interested in affordable housing and led from one thing to another, but to an interest in really serving on the Austin City Council and focusing on affordable housing, and especially on partnerships between the school district and the city, and really working to make Austin a place where all families can thrive, and also a place where we have housing for all kinds of household types in all parts of the city, so that we have housing close to services, close to jobs, close to schools in all parts of our city, and housing that works for folks with kids, as well as for families who need extra bedrooms for caregivers, et cetera. So thanks very much. Oh, sorry, I forgot.
Same question for you, Mayor. Where did you decide to live? Why did you decide to live where you live now, and how does that influence your beliefs on housing and inform how you advocate for housing policies or reform?
Thank you, and thanks to all of y'all for being here and for having a forum like this. This is maybe the single most important thing we're dealing with in our city, and that's housing. That's why my mantra has been affordability first. And for those that don't know, I'm Mayor Kirk Watson. I was elected this time in 2022. I served one time before as mayor from 1997 to 2001. During that period of time, we created the city's first affordable housing trust fund. We created the Smart Housing Program, which is still used today. And I could give some other examples of things that we did even back then. I served in the Texas Senate for about 13 and a half years before running again this time. I live in Hyde Park, and I live in Hyde Park in large part because it has such a diverse mix of housing in it. I live in a single-family house, but directly behind me are multiple duplexes. Down the street is a condo project, series of condos. Across the street, you have duplex. Just a stone's throw away, you have apartment complexes. You have students living there. You have bus lines that can run through there. You have lots of bike paths for people to be able to use, and it's a very walkable community. In many ways, this neighborhood, while there could be more happening in that neighborhood in terms of some of the growth, this neighborhood puts a lie to the argument that having multiple uses on a lot somehow destroys neighborhoods, because we've seen it happen in a positive way in this neighborhood. That's part of the reason I am so pleased that our affordability first agenda has had such success in passing the home initiative, in passing Home 2, in passing the equitable transit-oriented development, and stopped the stagnation we've seen for almost a decade before I came into the mayor's office on being able to make changes in that old land development code and actually start moving forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Bowen.
Well, I guess I'm the surprise guest since nobody knew I was going to show up until I found out about this last night. So my name's Jeffrey Bowen. I am the last minute contestant in this contest. I moved back to Texas in 1989 when I was stationed at Bergstrom Air Force Base. For those that don't know, that used to be an Air Force base. I had a job there teaching leadership and management, but I came from the construction field. I was a construction manager in the Air Force. And still do that to this day with my own small construction company doing construction services. The question is, how did I pick where I lived? When we first moved back, Austin was pretty bad off. There was numerous pages in the newspaper of nothing but houses that were on the foreclosure market. We looked around. Everybody kept saying, you need to move up to the northwest side of town. I said, but I'm going to work on the southeast side of town. So we finally found a place on the southwest side of town, just off of Brody. That was when Brody Lane had a very small section of it that was 4-lane. Everything else was 2-lane. So for 35 years, I've seen this whole process go. And like the mayor, we have apartment complexes just right across the field from us on both sides. But I live in what's called Bill Milburn. It's a Bill Milburn type starter home type subdivision. Didn't think we were going to be there over 4 years. 35 years later, here we are. So we moved there just basically for the convenience and never really thought that we were going to be leaving. But I'm here now. I'm still working on projects, still building things, providing construction services, right, and actually doing, helping out. I actually worked for Habitat for Humanities for a while, teaching their home maintenance program, actually wrote it and taught it for a while. So I can see my time is up, so thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Carmen Yanes Pulido, and I'm a lifelong Austinite, community organizer, and former city commissioner. I was born a block east of Clarksville in Old West Austin and grew up there and in East Austin, where I still have family. And I grew up seeing two sides of Austin. I grew up in an incredibly diverse community with renters, with homeowners, with people from all over the city and all over the world. My elementary school had a very high international population, and that shaped my view of Austin. I also went to magnet schools, and I got to see all different kinds of neighborhoods in Austin. And that has informed the way I think of neighborhoods, the way I think of cost of living, the way I think of stability. I have served on the Planning Commission for 4 years, part of that through maybe the second phase of that 10-year back and forth about the battle for what kind of regulations we have on our land development code and what kind of outcomes do we want to see, not just related to housing, but quality of life as well. And I served on the Latino Quality of Life Commission for 4 years, Resource Advisory Commission, making budget recommendations to our council about all kinds of issues that affect Latinos and all people. I did a lot of collaboration with the African American Quality of Life Commission, Asian, et cetera. And I also served on the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. I live in Dellwood 2, which is a neighborhood just adjacent to Mueller, or Miller, depending on how long you've been here. And I lived there for 3 years as a renter, actually. I chose that neighborhood because it was an incredibly affordable neighborhood for renters at the time, and I lived with service industry workers, and I was in the nonprofit scene. We paid $1,100 a month for a 3-bedroom house. And I also loved that neighborhood because of the community connections, old and new neighborhoods, the mix of apartments and homes, and I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a 2-bedroom house that I still live in today. It has shaped what I have seen. Time's up, but I'll say more in my further comments. Thank you.
The next question, Kathy, can we start with you this time? Thank you. So over the past 2 decades, the city of Austin has invested hundreds of millions of dollars to subsidize the development of income-restricted affordable housing units through bond programs, the Housing Trust Fund, and various other mechanisms. What is your perspective on how effective those investments have been, and what, if any, policy and program changes would you support in these areas?
Thanks for the question. These have been critical to creating affordable housing here in the city of Austin. I mentioned how I got interested in affordable housing, joined Women in Housing to learn more about it, and then negotiated a community development agreement that resulted in some affordable housing dollars as part of being a neighborhood president in Bouldin Creek before I moved to a different neighborhood. As a neighborhood leader, campaigned for our first ever affordable housing bonds to help get those passed, and I've campaigned for every single one since. These have been critically important in bringing dollars into our community, in creating jobs, and creating safe, stable, wonderful units throughout our city for folks who needed them, individuals leaving homelessness, families leaving homelessness. They've been essential. And in the year when the bonds got voted down, one of my colleagues and I championed taking our budget stabilization, or taking a budget surplus and putting it toward the bond projects that we had hoped to get funded. It was not popular with everyone. I got some of the ugliest emails I've ever received while as a council member, but it was the right thing to do. It allowed some of those developments to move forward that year in a way that was critically necessary for the families that came to live in those. As a council member, I also championed and led the council in expanding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to capture a broader array of dollars from all properties that had previously not been paying taxes. To that point, it had just been city dollars. That's resulted in additional millions for affordable housing. So I'm committed to continuing that work. We need to continue with bonds. We need to expand and really work on making our density bonus programs more effective. We need to build on city-owned land. And, you know, in talking with smaller affordable housing developers, I understand that we need to do a better job of maybe hiring more staff at the housing department and helping get resources to those smaller organizations that are trying to build affordable housing, and increasing the subsidy so there's not as much of a delta between the cost of providing that housing and the subsidy they're receiving, but open to hearing more process improvements we need.
Thank you. Mayor?
Sure. Well, I've been a supporter of I think they're absolutely critical. I mean, in the 2022 election, I was both a political and financial supporter. We're going to need to do more. I anticipate that as part of this bond package, where we have now, the council is just is setting up a task force to look at a comprehensive bond package for no later than 2026. I think a key part of that's going to need to also include bonding for affordable housing. And I think it's going to be important to maybe start looking at how we might be creative in different ways with that. For example, if it can be utilized in a way so that it makes capital and credit available to folks for first-time home buyers, things of that nature might become important there. But I want to say something that I think is very important about that. While I'm very supportive of what we've done over the years and think we need to do more, it's not enough to just say that you have been for bond packages in the past. It's not enough. What's important is that we've needed for over a decade now to make changes in the way we go about allowing building to occur for housing in this community. That means allowing 3 by right on a piece of property. That means reducing minimum lot sizes. That means making the kinds of changes in a very antiquated land development code that were not happening because they were being blocked. And it's very important that if you're going to say you're for affordable housing, you need to be for affordable housing. And you need to be willing to make the changes that, you know, the land development code hadn't been changed until I was elected mayor, and this council made the changes since the mid-'80s. Well, thank God nothing else about Austin didn't change since the 1980s. And I say that as a joke, but of course the point is we need more bonds, but we also need to continue the progress we're making on making it easier to build more housing as a general rule.
Mr. Bowen.
Thank you. I'm also on Austin Neighborhood Council, and one of the things that we have strived for over many years is affordable housing. And whenever we've went to speak at council or looked at different items that were being brought up, we were very concerned over the amount of affordable housing that was being allowed or how much was actually being done. What were the limitations on how much or how developers were being able to get out of it, whether it was paying for fee in lieu or whether or not the percentage of what they were asking for was, oh, they had to meet 80% MFI. Many of us wanted to see something to where that was a whole lot lower versus being such a high number. So there's room for improvement. We also need to be thinking in that realm of not only the transportation around it, but also when we start looking at the issues of home one and home two, those unintended consequences that can also be surrounded by that. And those are some of the things that need to be talked about and discussed in being able to develop more affordable housing. I know many people right now that are in their senior age, or even in my neighborhoods, that we're getting more and more people that are being pushed out because of the high taxes and those things, because things are not being affordable. So at this point, but also some clarification and some actual transparency as to how well is the affordable housing project working? What are those numbers? And that needs to be brought out and made sure is being very clear to all of the taxpayers, the voters, and those that need it. Thank you.
You. Giannis Pulido.
What I didn't say in my intro is that I've been a community organizer in over 25 different elementary and middle school communities across Austin, all over the city. And as a longtime organizer, I may be, and somebody who's from here, I may be the most in relationship with the actual people who are most in need of affordable housing, the renters who are losing their housing, the longtime homeowners who go from homeowner to renter to unhoused in less than a year in some cases, and those are predominantly African American and Mexican American Austinites. And I've also seen amazing progress in creating truly affordable and mixed income developments. I've done it. I've worked, door knocked with some of you to get 50 mixed income units accessible to transit in my own neighborhood of Delwood 2. My dad's neighborhood is in the epicenter of gentrification, where actually they've negotiated 38 out of 40 zoning cases successfully to get more affordable units, to get green space. And I have to call out the myth. If you're for affordable housing, you have to be for affordable housing. There is no affordability in the past land use reforms of the last year. There is not a stitch of requirement. When you give by right entitlements, what people do is find a $500,000 or $800,000 house or duplex, tear it down, and build $3 million houses. We've seen it in neighborhoods all over. You actually need the zoning process or some public negotiation or a regulation or stipulation to make it affordable, and we've seen that successfully. I'm a scholar with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I was in the Fulcrum Fellowship and a Field Catalyst program with thinkers and doers all over this country who are trying to crack this nut, because it's not just Austin. We have to switch to looking at preserving the affordable units we have, protecting tenants and low-income homeowners so we can negotiate with private equity, and producing truly affordable housing. We did it to get 300 low-income units in East Austin in a for-profit project because it was subsidized by the Cesar Chavez Foundation, because community was at the table to say, this is the history, this is what's affordable to this area. It absolutely can be done. But this trickle-down Reaganomics idea that you just kick the barn doors open to private equity and you'll get affordability is proven untrue again and again. And those millions of new units that have brought rents down were built under the existing code without any of these recent changes. So we need to be factual about who's actually benefiting from these policies.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we'd all agree that Austin. Oh, I'm sorry. We came around to the end. See? Sorry about that, Dad.
That's okay. So around 2000, I was still a high school teacher, and I was renting a room from our librarian at Johnston, lived on the east side on Willow Street. And it was well before then, but you could see the downtown development, which pushed eastwards. The gentrification has been happening for decades, okay? It's not something that's new. Number one. So yes, we need to double down on the type of things that you mentioned in the question. But my problem is that cost of living has been going through the roof since 1997 in Austin. We're the fastest growing city for millionaires. Our income inequality continues to increase, and our percentage of Black and Latino residents continues to decrease. And that's why I think we need new leadership. Now, my organization supported the affordable housing bonds. But the things that I led on and our organization led on during the pandemic, winning 40 to 50 million, depending how you count it, for rental assistance from the city and county, and Central Texas Interfaith really built a political will in working with council members, Mayor Adler, and Travis County Judge Brown, and the County Commissioner's Court to get that ARPA money, that $200 million, put towards permanent housing for those experiencing homelessness. And we fought that out for a year, okay? And that's the type of mayor I would be. The last thing I want to say is we don't talk enough about the role of education and workforce, and I'm glad Carmen mentioned schools, because that's the other side of the equation. It's how much are people earning? And we're preparing kids that grow up here and adults that are underemployed for the good jobs that exist. And are we supporting unions and living wage policies to turn low-paying jobs into solid middle-class jobs? Thanks.
Thank you. And again, apologies. So next question, a little context first. I think we'd all agree that Austin, Texas is a wonderful city. But I think most of us would agree that opportunity is not equitably dispersed throughout our community. So we talk about high opportunity areas, high opportunity neighborhoods in the community. Those are parts of the community that have access to our best schools, that aren't food deserts or childcare deserts, where there's abundant, well-paying jobs, transportation options. This is what we mean by a high opportunity neighborhood, a high opportunity area in our city. So my next question, and Mayor, if it's okay, I'll start with you. How would you balance the need for additional housing in high opportunity areas of Austin with existing residents' concerns regarding change?
Well, that is a very important question, and one that we have worked very hard as a council and as a team over the past 20 months or so, almost 2 years now, in trying to get to where you can make changes in the land development code. A key part, I'm going to say two things about that. Number one is a key part of it is to listen to see if there are alternatives that are being brought forward that you can then implement. A key part of that is if you look at what we did on the equitable transit-oriented development, we actually made some amendments even as we were passing it to try to listen to what the neighborhoods were saying so that they would see they would see that they were being listened to, and you could get some of the balance that was necessary. In addition to that, one of the things in terms of being concerned about unintended consequences, which is something we should always be concerned about, it should not paralyze us, but we should be concerned about it, is we added an amendment. It was my amendment that we added to what we were doing through these land development code changes, so that what we're going to do is basically audit or do a performance review 6 months, a year, and then on an annual basis, so that we're asking the kinds of questions that we need to be asking so that we can reach the kind of balance that's important. The final thing I'll say about that, the second thing I'll say about it, is that when we talk about affordability, of course we're here now talking about housing, but it's true that we need to also be looking at how we make it where people can have more money in their pockets so that they can afford to live here. I've been working very hard to change the economic development paradigm in our community, where it's not just focused on the number of new jobs we create, pat ourselves on the back and declare ourselves winners, but how do we train? And we've actually worked directly with the unions, and in this budget put $5 million into the creation of the Austin Infrastructure Academy so that we will be able to put folks into good paying careers, prevailing wage type careers, and they'll be able to, people will be able to afford to live here even if they don't have 4-year degrees. That is something we've just begun, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of that.
Thank you. Mr. Bowen.
Balance is, we talk about this, and I appreciate the mayor and the council doing this when it comes to getting more people into the trades. There's a lack of exactly people getting into the trades, whether it be electricians, whether it be plumbers. Today, on one of my small projects that I'm helping a lady that had to move out of town because she couldn't stand to be here anymore. It was just getting too expensive. I ran into a young lady that was probably in her middle 20s, there to help patch a wood floor. When she got out of the truck, I just said, it's great to see a female in the trades actually doing this by herself and handling that. So she has found that balance within her own family that has helped her, and she's out there making service calls and doing those. So when you start looking at this, we have to look at the balance of this, of the issues that come about with what happens when we start building in these areas and thinking about what about our tree canopy? What about our heat island? What about our flooding? Will our infrastructure handle? Hopefully getting other people into some of these trades will help resolve some of the issues that we have with our infrastructure, whether they're placing asphalt down on the back of a machine, of a lay-down machine, or whether they're just actually, hanging cables. There needs to be that that connection of being able to make sure that there's plenty of housing, but there also needs to be a good balance within that whole process. It is a constantly working situation that needs to be done and not forgotten, because you all need and want housing, you need places to live, and so do those people that actually put the, drive the nails, put the windows in, do all those other type of things. Thank you.
Thank you. Carmen?
The question was about high opportunity areas, and I think this is really important. Every single neighborhood has an ecosystem of housing. And in most neighborhoods, you will find different levels of affordability. You will often find more affordable housing in the nodes and margins of the neighborhood. You will find older apartment complexes and duplexes. And particularly those older, smaller apartment complexes tend to be the most affordable, as do the rental homes. My day job is with Go Austin, Vamos Austin. We've been organizing in North and South Austin, areas south of Ben White 71, areas north of 290 on both sides of the highway. And it's very clear as day that those are areas now experiencing a lot of the gentrification and displacement and rapid increase in cost of living that we saw here in East Austin. We've learned these experiments. And so what we see is when we deregulate and we allow any kind of construction, the first redevelopment is going to be those most affordable structures. It is going to tear down those structures and build something more expensive. We saw it on River Street here in Cesar Chavez. Those were the first $500,000 condos to come into the barrio, were actually the poorest street in the East Town Lake area. And you can ask anyone. You can go to Rosedale, very high opportunity area, right? Briker Woods Elementary. And they can tell you where their affordable housing was, in the duplexes where working, renting families lived. And policies like HOME and ETOD open up those opportunities for developers and investors to buy low and sell high. What can be done is there are over 200 parcels owned by the city. We should be building on city-owned land. We should be looking at preserving existing affordable units and subsidizing, requiring deeply affordable new housing in those high opportunity areas. If a firefighter can't afford it, that means that a service industry person can't afford it. And I will say, our code has had many changes. To say it hasn't changed since 1984 erases the displacement and racist history of the East Riverside Corridor Plan, the East Cesar Chavez Master Plan, small infill in Chestnut neighborhood, and we can see what has happened. All of that housing has become more expensive, not less. But it doesn't have to be. We can actually stabilize for all levels.
I'll pass it down to Mr. Greco here.
Three things. Number one, I'm a proponent of fair share housing, the concept that each part of the city should share in affordable housing and housing at all levels of income. Number two, I thought our land use code needed to be updated, and I'll just say that, especially around transit corridors, but even in neighborhoods. But I would have fought for stronger anti-displacement measures, and the role of institutional investors buying up 40% of homes, private equity, Wall Street firms, to me is one of the biggest drivers of unaffordability. And there's things we can do locally, rental and mortgage assistance, loan programs for ADUs, state level. Jeannie Hinojosa has filed bills, but now even the governor is saying it's a problem, and Vice President Harris is. We need to curb the role of institutional investors so any changes to the code work for people who live here or plan to live here, not private equity. And the last thing I'll say, in this election, we can be a people of fate or a people of faith. And I don't mean religious faith necessarily. If we're people of fate, then we think, folks who have been there, done that, running for, 8th election, and they know best, and let's give them one more shot. With all due respect, that's being fated into a decision. If we're people of faith, faith in democracy, faith in our agency as active citizens and our collective power to solve issues like affordability, protect civil rights against state attacks, and to shape the future of Central Texas, that's the kind of campaign I'm going to run, and that's the kind of mayor I'll be. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to start by just talking about high opportunity districts, and I understand from years of doing this, that's a very specific term, but it will be my goal as your mayor to make sure that no matter where you live in the city, you have access to great education, and that we're doing everything we can as the city of Austin to be a good partner to AISD and to the other school districts that fall within that, and I championed some of the really effective strategies in doing that as a council member, that you have access to public transit, that you have access to quality early child care, early childhood education, that you have access to food, to healthy, fresh food. As a council member, I worked hard on many of the initiatives that came forward to try to expand food access. I initiated the food plan that is about to hit council. You know, these are critically important issues to make sure that every individual, every family in this city has access to what they need to be successful and to thrive. I just want to go back to some of the conversation we had about affordable housing. We need to do a better job in this city of preserving the affordable housing that is out there and not subsidized and not protected and restricted. And we need to be careful not to do things in our zoning code and in our zoning changes that are going to exacerbate the demolition of that housing and also increase displacement. And I appreciate that the council is going to look at the data. I've been looking at the data, and I can tell you what I'm seeing. It looks like some of those early permits are absolutely resulting in demolition. One of the first ones out of the gate, I think, I have the notes over there, but I think it's 1508 Holly. If you look at the pictures on Google Maps, you'll see about this time last fall, perfectly lovely house on a big lot, could have added those houses right behind it. Well, that house is now gone, and they've put in a permit for 3 units. So when we make changes, we need to do it cautiously and deliberatively, and if we're actually trying to create affordable housing, then there need to be provisions in place to make sure that that housing is going to come. And allowing the market to determine that is not going to work. There are no affordability requirements, not even a benefit, and this council did not even successfully prohibit investor-owned short-term rentals on properties with 3 units under Home 1. So, you know, if we want to create housing, well, prohibit hotels. That would be a good start. If you want to create affordable housing, put in some provisions that will require that.
Thank you. So I've been told we have a time for one more question. So I'm going to ask my timekeeper here to make him give you 1 minute to answer the easiest question, totally non-controversial of the evening. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Bowen. What do you see as the primary causes of homelessness, and what are the most effective interventions required to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring?
One of the biggest issues that I see is our constant cost of how high it is to live here. How many people are being driven out because of whether it's our taxes, whether it's our utilities, all of those issues. I truly believe that one of the consequences of a vast growing economy is that there is going to be some that are left behind. We shouldn't be leaving people behind when we have the options of being able to help. Now we know that there's 2 different segments. There's those that are chronic and they basically are having some drug issues, alcohol, whatever the case is. But the ones that are just right there on the cusp and they need that little bit of help, we need to be helping them up and making sure that we can get them that support that they need. We still need to work with the others out here to help them get through that. But the ones that are the quick fixes, that should be one of our main concentrations.
Listen to directly impacted people. Center the people who have the lived experience and the frontline workers and organizations who are serving them every day, who see that the system is broken, who can tell us where to reallocate social services funding. We spend more per capita on homelessness than Los Angeles, and our advocates can tell you where money needs to go. It needs to go more to the point of prevention. Right now, if you're a mom in a storage unit with 3 kids, you can't get help. If you're a security officer like the one I talked to at Austin Energy, who's working for a private security firm but living in a hotel because she can't get into an apartment, you can't get help. You have to be on the street. We have 1 in 3 visitors to the Sunrise Navigation Center with children. We can reallocate money. We spend millions of dollars on sweeps for private companies that have connections to our leadership when we could be putting that money into social services. And we need to stop demolishing the last apartments that rent for less than $1,000 a month. I watched us displace 1/3 of the population of Go Valley Elementary in the name of more housing, and we lost net loss of 50 affordable units. Prevention, production, stop demolishing housing, reallocate social services, and center directly impacted people.
Thank you.
As Director of Central Texas Interfaith, most of our churches dealt directly with direct service for those experiencing homelessness. Lack of a social, cohesive safety net is one. And number two, even though we count 6,000, I think in the last point in time contact, when school districts or the federal government count those experiencing homelessness, it's 4 or 5 times as large, because they count folks who are doubling up, couch surfing, living in unsanctioned garage apartments, even in families that are just moving from house to house. So number one, we need to double down on our investments in permanent supportive housing and services. That we need to do a better job on emergency shelters, overnight shelters, and connecting those two through transitional housing. We need to do a better job on as well.
So there's a lot to say here, and I invite you to have a conversation with me afterward or outside of this forum. I served as the chair of the Ending Community Homelessness Advisory Committee for a time. I championed these issues as the council member who represented District 9. Many of my constituents were individuals experiencing homelessness. I helped support into creation the Homelessness Outreach Street Team to get money to our shelters downtown, which allowed the women and children to move out of Salvation Army into the Family Center. So this is an area of critical importance to me, and your mayor, your next mayor, needs to be a champion of this issue and needs to be working with the private sector to help fund what is, the solution we need, which is to build housing. We end homelessness with housing. We need, at every opportunity, we need to create units for individuals who are experiencing homelessness. When we're building on our own land, we need to have units for the continuum of care. We need to require that when we can in our density bonuses of developers, and we need to be investing across the spectrum, not just in prevention, not just in shelter, as we have overinvested through the years at times. We need to create those permanent supportive units that are also going to include services as well. This is something that we all need to be involved in. I've been out there on the point in time counts year after year. There are no repeating stories, but certainly in answer to your question, some of the causes are the expensiveness of housing, the lack of access to good jobs and good training, domestic violence. Every individual I met on the point in time count had a slightly different path, but certainly they're all our neighbors and deserve a safe and stable place to.
Thank you. Mayor?
In most of the cases, in almost all of the cases, there's typically some dramatic event. It's either a breakdown in the family, it's an illness, it may be domestic abuse. It is just so many people live right on the edge of one thing that puts them into a homeless situation. When I took office, we were not addressing, I feel like we had a broken system at that point in time. And you can remember what it was like. We had a broken system. We've done a number of things. One is we have started building out the entire continuum. More permanent supportive housing and lots of permanent supportive housing, but also prevention. If you look at this last budget, there's money that we've put into prevention, including tenant stabilization money. There's money that was put into prevention in terms of rapid rehousing. There's also more shelter beds. I've also worked and was able to get the state of Texas to put $65 million into prevention and into non-congregate shelters. We have to build out that entire continuum. In the last 20 months, we have really started doing that, and in this last budget, we made a really, in my opinion, historic difference to fix this broken system, and we're making the kind of progress that you need us to make.
Thank you. So one more little ad lib. Sorry, Mr. Timekeeper. So I'm going to give each of y'all 30 seconds. You have a room full of people for whom affordability is the #1 concern in the city. So this time we're going to start with you, Carmen. 30 seconds. Why should you be the mayor that we elect to make Austin more affordable?
I am the most connected to communities, to organizations, and I will keep a door open. I am on a constant growing edge. I have learned so much on this campaign history alone, and I have found connections with people who thought they disagreed, but we all want Austin to be affordable for us, and we all want to live in diverse communities. I believe that word means different things to different people, but we want this to be the kind of place where people can continue to move, continue to put roots in, grow their families, choose their families. It's not just about preserving Austin for the people who have been here, it's about preserving a city that actually welcomes all kinds of people, not just the wealthy.
Thank you. Doug?
I won't contest Carmen's experience, but what I do contest is that you're the most connected to community. Because I grew up in a working class background. I was a high school teacher on the East Side, a community organizer for my whole career, worked in the LGBT movement with Equality California in the Central Valley with Dolores Huerta, who's endorsed me. And I know what it means to grow up in a working class family, and I will fight for working people and to keep Austin affordable and to rebuild a middle class that has been hollowed out over the last 30 years.
Thanks so much for your time tonight. I welcome you to reach out if you've got questions or want to talk further. www.kathyforaustin.com. If elected, I'm going to be your labor champion, as I have been in the past, champion of affordable housing. And again, we need an environmental champion, somebody who's really looking to the future and in an innovative way. And we need somebody who is going to be a champion for our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness and be ready to do whatever it takes to really marshal the political support and the financing that we need to end homelessness. Thank you.
Mayor?
This council, with my leadership as mayor, our motto has been affordability first, and we have delivered. We have delivered in an historic way, setting aside the decade before where we were stagnant because people were blocking what was trying to be done with regard to affordability. I'm very proud to have been endorsed by the EMS union, the firefighters union, because they know what we're doing with regard to affordability. I'm proud to have been endorsed by ARA and the Austin Infill Coalition because they know what we're doing with regard to more housing and affordability. We're getting things done, and we'll continue to get things done. I appreciate y'all being here and your interest.
Finally, Mr. Bowen.
Well, thanks for having us here tonight. I'm not a politician. I've worked in trying to get things done and bringing people and being able to deal with, we may not agree with everything, but we can sure sit down and have a conversation about this. I am more than likely the only person up here that's actually pulled a building permit and understand what it takes to go through that process. Not only the 5-pager, but the 7-pager, and having to explain to somebody, why is everything being held up? I can't tell you why, but they just said this is on the wrong page. So there needs to be some type of common sense and being able to work with people and just say, and ask the questions, why is it this way? Maybe it's time for a change. This is not Austin, Texas. This is Austin, Texas. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all for stepping up. Good night.
All right, thank you, everybody. My name's Lucy Begg. I'm an architect and also a member of AIA Austin's Housing Advocacy Committee. Woo! I'm so pleased that we've got 2 District 4 candidates with us this evening, Monica Guzman, Policy Director of GAVA, and Council Member Chito Vela. Thank you. I also want to recognize that there are 3 other candidates running for District 4, Luis Herron, Eduardo Romero, and Jim Raybuck. And this forum was actually organized and the invites had gone out before they registered to run, hence why we have the candidates here that we do tonight. So I'm going to start with a more personal question. And to you first, Monica. Why did you decide to live where you live? And how does that influence your beliefs on housing and inform how you advocate on certain housing policies or reforms?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. I am native to Austin, so I'm one of the unicorns, like I like to say. Most of my life has been in North Central Austin. Actually, show my age. Back then, what is now 183 and Mopac was pasture land. That was Northwest Austin, the city limits. So that's where I spent most of my childhood and growing up, and ended up moving a little farther south, more for rent that was lower, rent that I could afford. When there was an opportunity to move back up, that was in 2014, and I just decided to be in an area I knew, old hunting grounds. I lived in the Runberg area in the 90s as a single parent. I also love the vibrancy, multilingual, multicultural, all the different foods, the small stores. I don't want to live in Walmart City. I don't want to live surrounded by towering buildings and skyscrapers and office buildings. I want to live in a place that's similar to the area I grew up in. It's different enough, but it's closer than other places. And what influences my position on policies is my lived experience as a single parent. I got married at a young age. I was a single parent by the time I was 21. When I moved back to Austin, I could not afford rent. I bounced between houses of families. And that's part of the hidden homeless. Yes, it was family. Yes, we had a roof over our heads, but it wasn't my home. It wasn't our home. When I was finally able to be on my own feet, I was always looking for the move-in special. So we were moving every single year, literally. That is disruptive on a child's education, so I was fortunate enough to be able to stay near the schools that he was meant to go to, so he had his friends along the way. So that is what drives my position. I heard someone say earlier about affordable housing, believing in affordable housing. I'm a big believer of affordable housing because of my lived experience. That also means it's affordable for the people who live there now. It's affordable for the people who are struggling paycheck to paycheck, who are a paycheck away from being on the streets. District 4 has a median family income of just over $59,000, yet the MFI, according to HUD, is 63. So that tells you they can't afford much. So my experience, the community's experience, that is what drives my position.
Thank you, Monica. Councilman Vela.
So I am originally from Laredo, Texas. Grew up down there and came to Austin as a freshman to the University of Texas. Lived mostly kind of north of campus in the cheapest student housing was kind of 51st Street North, kind of in the North Loop area. And that was where I rented a lot of spots. I lived on like 46th, 47th and Red River in those duplexes and kind of different. There was a home that had turned into 6 single units that I lived in for a good long run. And once I was married, having a child, we wanted to get a place, and we kind of were looking primarily around the area that we were most familiar with, just to give a sense of, you know, what at the time we were looking for a house. $125,000 was our maximum budget for buying a house. This was like in 2004, 2005 time frame. And we found a house off of Cameron Road in Windsor Park, where I've been to this day. I've been there since 2005. My kids have grown up in that neighborhood, and it's been a wonderful place. So I always enjoyed the district. But ultimately, I think we, like so many other folks, you live where you can afford to live. I mean, you know, it wasn't really a choice per se. It was a situation where we're going to go and buy a home where there's a home that we can afford to buy. Thankfully, back then, it was still in central Austin. You know, now we have folks, my kids have friends that are moving to like Gerald and to, you know, Buda and to, I mean, just far, far away. And that's should not be happening. You know, we've got to provide housing in the central area of Austin that's affordable for folks and especially for families.
Thank you. So the next questions are related to District 4 and a little bit along the theme of helping familiarize the room with the people and places of District 4. So, Councilmember Vela, could you give us an insight into some of the key demographic groups that make up District 4 residents and what you consider to be the main housing challenges that they face?
Yeah, the District 4 is about 70% Latino, a very heavy renter population, very heavy immigrant population, especially when we're talking about kind of central Austin, you know, the Lamar-Rumburg area, St. John, Georgian Acres, very, very large population of working class folks and working class immigrants in particular. One of the main issues in terms of District 4 and its population is apartment rents. That is really the driving force behind a lot of my policy making, a lot of my policy positions. And when we're talking about renters, the worst thing for renters is housing scarcity. If apartment complexes are 97% full, 97%, occupied, tenants have no leverage. Landlords can raise rents, and too bad for you, you're going to have to pay it because there's no available apartments. Or if there is an available apartment, it might be 2 or 3 months before it's available, and they're going to demand deposit, first month's rent, and last month's rent. You have no negotiating leverage whatsoever. What we're trying to do in Austin, and we've successfully done in Austin, is increase our amount of housing so that there are vacancies. And we've seen that in the last year. Austin has built a tremendous amount of housing over the last few years. We've seen the vacancy rate drop to around 90%. I think it's even below 90% at this point. And we're finally seeing rents go down. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect.
Thank you. Monica, can you answer the same question?
Would you mind repeating it, please?
The question is, could you give us an insight into some of the key demographic groups that make up District 4 and what you consider to be the main housing challenges that they face?
Well, officially, demographics, as of 2 years ago, we had almost 98,000 people. 25% were under 18, just over 1/3 immigrants. That's refugees, asylees, documented, undocumented. 4% veterans, 8% seniors. And it's basically a low-income, moderate-income district. As I said, the median family income for the entire district for a family of 4 is just over $59,000. But it's vibrant, they struggle, and what we have a lot of income restricted. We have 3 housing authority properties north of Research. We have several income restricted, which meet between the 30 to 60% MFI. I used to live in one of them years ago, both in that area and almost south of the river. And we need more of that. We need to preserve the stock we have, and we need to add to it. That's partnerships, public-private, public not-for-profit. We also need permanent supportive housing. Caritas of Austin opened its first permanent supportive housing community in my neighborhood just earlier this year. We need to see more of that because bridge shelters are not the answer. We need to be compassionate about people who are on the streets, who are hiding under the highways. I just read a press release earlier today about that for some of the ones in our district. So we need to think about who's there, what they can afford, what their needs are. And rents coming down, yeah, they did, but it's really the upper end for condos and high-income luxury apartments for people who could afford the rent where it was at before it came down. We have saturation of development. That's part of the reason there's vacancies increasing. I happened to check Zillow the other day, and a lot of them are having to do giveaways, freebies, to bring people in to occupy those places. So clearly, just having an apartment complex or multifamily development is not necessarily the answer. It needs to be nuanced for the needs in the area that's being developed.
Thank you. I think that's a great segue into my next question, which is about whether there are any particular housing developments in District 4, and that could be from any era of development, either recently or more historically, that you consider to be a good example of an innovative housing solution, either in its form or its development model or another way. And just to keep it even, I'm going to go back to Chito to start with that one.
Sure. Just before I answer that, Class C apartments, which are the lowest kind of class, no amenity apartments, have fallen about 10% in rent over the. So we're seeing drops across all apartment classes, whether you're talking about a nice place on Rainey Street or whether you're talking about an apartment on Lamar and Runberg, rents are dropping across categories across the city. I would highlight in terms of the current developments, one that we just approved it for the Austin Housing Finance Corporation, which is the city council kind of reforms as the Austin Housing Finance Corporation and then approves money for different projects. But it's one that is just north of 183, not far from Burnett Middle School, that is going to be about 23 units, condo, townhome, community land trust, affordable housing project. That is, I was so happy to see that on the agenda, so happy to see it move through. And that's one of those things where, we at one point did a good job of building affordable housing, and there's a lot of legacy projects that today provide a lot of, subsidized affordable housing for elderly, disabled, for lots of different types of people. I feel like we paused on that for decades. And now we're finally launching through the voters' approval of the housing bonds, through ARPA funds, through these different sources of funds. We're finally increasing the stock of housing. And again, that goes to my policy goal of increasing the amount of housing, not just subsidized, affordable, publicly owned, nonprofit housing, but also market rate housing. It really is an all of the above type strategy that we need to if we do want to lower rental prices and lower housing prices.
Thank you.
And actually, I know exactly which one he's talking about on Hathaway. I was very excited to see that. I was a Burnett sailor many, many moons ago, as was my son. So yes, a perfect example of public, not-for-profit housing. I always love seeing that out there. But to answer the question, I love this question because it kind of got me laughing when I was working on my answer, because it's like any era, but innovative. It almost seems contradictory. But again, what I was talking about, nuance. So some great examples are the housing authority properties. Also, another example, what many might not know about, are licensed sobering homes. They also work with people who are re-entry, and Shekinah properties, or Shekinah communities, I never can figure out what the name is. They have 3 properties, all in District 4, 2 for men, 1 for women, and they have case management on site. They connect the residents with other services. Again, Caritas's public permanent supportive housing, on Rutland. Those are great examples. Some may be a little bit newer in the way they look, but the concept has been around for a long time. And again, the public not-for-profit, public-private partnership, it needs to be nuanced for the needs. It needs to be affordable for the people in that community. And it's a low-income district. So build without any protective measures, without any subsidies, without any partnerships to help bring it down for the residents, it just won't work.
Thank you. And I'm going to segue that one into a sort of broader look at the displacement question. Obviously, that is the theme running through this evening and through a lot of your answers to the questions tonight. Rising housing costs and gentrification is the significant challenge in Austin. So to build on the kind of examples you've been talking about, if you were elected to office, what strategies or policies do you propose to address and mitigate displacement that build on or change what has been happening to date? And Monica, if you can start.
Well, one of the first things would you see about amending the recent land use changes, the home initiative, because yes, it does allow for build. However, as I've been talking to people, they don't like that. They're concerned. And also many, such as community-powered ATX, who I advocated with, I'm part of that coalition, that initiative lacked guardrails to minimize speculator activity from coming in and swooping up land and sitting on it, or building something that's just totally out of character with the neighborhood. There also needs to be protective measures and equity anti-displacement overlay in the more vulnerable communities, which will require the developers to engage with the community to find a way to make it more affordable and minimize displacement. Again, it's about process, it's about nuancing. It's really important to encourage developers to meet with the community that they're looking to develop in. And I don't mean do a 2-minute presentation in a neighborhood association and check the box. I'm talking about sitting down and having a real conversation. Because you never know, the neighborhood just might support, but you'll never know if you don't take the time to do that. So that's really important, is process. Because I'm all about progress. Austin's growing. I'm not against progress. I'm not against multifamily. I've been a renter for more than 30 years. So we just need to find a way that makes it work for everybody, not just the ones who can afford it once it's built.
So the question of gentrification displacement has been a live issue for 30 years at this point. I mean, I remember 95, 99, these were pertinent questions in Austin, which had always been a very affordable city. That was really its main attraction. We got so many folks from, folks that couldn't afford LA or New York, they would come here because there were cultural opportunities, there were cheap rents, there were jobs, they could do things here that were not necessarily available in a lot of other places. So, we've seen how Austin has grappled with gentrification displacement. We've seen how multiple other cities have grappled with gentrification displacement. And at this point, there's a clear theme that has emerged. San Francisco, San Jose is probably the poster child for the stop, that kind of putting up their hands and saying, we're not going to allow any new construction. We're going to really put strict limits on development in order to preserve our naturally affordable housing. To be frank, that policy has been a total failure. The idea that if you limit housing construction, then that's going to help the poor is just not borne out in reality. There's been a lot of really kind of data and research over the last few years. The rich will always outbid the poor for the same housing. You cannot, in a free market economy, just say that no one can build anymore. What's going to happen is that the rich are going to come in and outbid. On the flip side, a place like a Houston, a Denver, a lot of different cities that have been much more open to new construction, to infill construction, to expanding housing opportunities, have been much more successful in their efforts to fight. So again, just looking at the landscape, we've got to build housing in order to fight gentrification displacement. This whole idea of preserving our way to affordability, there's just not an actual example of a city that has successfully done that.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. And changes over the past year. We all know there's been a lot of activity in that area on numerous different fronts. I would love to hear what, if you were in office, what land development codes you would like to see implemented going forward in the context of what we've already seen over the past year that you think would impact housing affordability.
I would want to look not only at the recent changes, but just look at all of it to see what can be updated without having a grandiose public hearings or series of hearings. I'd also want to go look at the district as well as just the rest of the city. What are the needs? Do the research. What are the different income levels? I know traditionally when there's housing development, especially income restricted, they tend to look at the Austin-Travis County MFI chart, which is issued by HUD. And what has been proposed to council before, in the past and more than once, is to look at the MFI for the census tract. If the census tract has an MFI that is lower than the Austin-Travis County, then go based on that. Because what's the point of having an apartment complex, for example, that's good for people at 60% MFI, but the census tract, everybody's at 40. So it's still $1 million to them. It might as well be. So we need to find alternatives to still provide, still build what is needed to address the growth in Austin, but to minimize displacement. And again, I would love to put neighborhood housing back into play. There are 30 neighborhood planning areas, contact teams. I am one of the officers for the one in my neighborhood. And the community needs to be part of the process. They know their neighborhood better than anybody else. The only way someone on the dais would know that community as well as them is because they live there too. So that's why it's important to engage the community, find out what they want, work with him from the beginning to the end. So again, I'm not against progress. I'm not against growth. I'm against not taking the people into consideration, the people who live here now.
So I'm very proud of the Austin City Council over these last 2 years and the numerous housing changes that we've put into effect. Home 1, Home 2, the equitable transit-oriented development districts, which combined with our soon-to-be-built, hopefully, light rail line will provide real affordability, because I mean transportation is a huge part of housing cost, and we can't really think of one without the other. You know, like the Gerald example, you know, you can get a house in Gerald, your commute's going to be really expensive. So there's always those trade-offs. One of the initiatives that we're working through right now is a new apartment design that we're looking at. It's called the single stair apartment design, whereby I know this is an AIA crowd, so y'all gonna get it, but right now you have to have 2 staircases in an apartment, and what that does is it kind of elongates an apartment, and it really lends itself to the construction of single bedroom units efficiencies, because you know one side of the apartment is the hallway and the door into the hallway, the other side of the apartment is the wall and the window. So with allowing a single stair apartment complex, you would have the staircase in the middle of it, and you would have 4 units per floor wrapping around it. What that does is it allows those 4 units to be more family-sized units. Each one would be a corner apartment with windows and light, the stairway and the elevator. I mean, you're going to have elevators too, but the design, the single staircase just allows for a much more family-friendly design, a small footprint, so you need less land, there's less hallways and wasted space. So on a dollar per dollar basis, you might be able to generate some really deeply affordable family units within the central city by allowing these buildings to be built on little smaller plots of land, whereas normally you'd have to put together 2, 3, 4 lots to actually get an apartment building. I think that really has a lot of potential. I'm very excited about it. We're working our way through it. One last, got to be safe though. And there are some legitimate, safety concerns. Once we're done with this, they're going to be the safest buildings in Austin.
Thank you. I want to thank you both so much for your time this evening and making the effort to come out here and share your perspectives and plans, and wish you both the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good work, good work.
First of all, let me ask, why did you decide to live where you live, and how does that influence your beliefs on housing or inform you of how you advocate on certain housing policies and reforms?
Okay. So, yes, I'm Crystal Lane, and I'm running in District 6, which is far northwest Austin. It's a suburban district. And I am one opponent who is not here tonight, Mackenzie Kelly. So, where have I chosen to live, and how does that inform how I, think about housing and advocacy in relationship to it? My parents separated when I was very young, and I lived with my mother, and much as I heard a speaker before me talk about, we moved a lot in my early years. We eventually settled in Houston, in the suburbs, and I would spend I'd spend school years in Houston and summers with my family that was spread around the Midwest and also the Boston area. And I spent my summers running around on farms and in the woods where the weather was cooler. And then I would come back to Houston for the school year. When I graduated from high school, I wanted nothing more than to be out of the suburbs, like nothing more. And so I went to school in New York City at Columbia University. So I spent 4 years there without a car, doing every single thing without a car. And it is very different to live with no car than it is to sometimes have access to one and be doing your grocery shopping and your laundry and all of the things. But there's a very robust public transportation network there. From there, I went to live in Paris for a year and experienced another form of living car-free and, housing and transportation, and a very more of a mixed income experience in the city than you often get in the United States, and shops and walkable life and that kind of thing. And then I moved back to Boston, and I thought I would stay there and not come back to Texas. But that housing was very expensive, and I didn't have a car, and so I was living off of the bus line and then transferring to a train, and it was taking forever to get everywhere. I started biking a lot more, which was lovely. But I also decided that I can't make my whole life about making money just for housing and transportation. Oh, I'm so sorry I didn't get anywhere where I wanted to go. So since it's, okay, I should have asked what the time limit was with just one of me up here.
You're fine. That was
Oh.
So let me ask, typically losing a home is due to an accumulation of missed payments for whatever reason, or there are a lot of reasons to lose your home. Do you have a plan or funding to strategically assist those who might be in the process of losing their home?
So I'll give a little, how much time do I have? 2 minutes. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, okay. All right, well, I want to go back on the other one. But anyway, in any case. Okay, so I think that one of the biggest challenges with housing in Austin, I mean, we do absolutely, affordability is important, but something that I don't hear talked about nearly as much is stability. And as housing has gotten more expensive, we have now a majority renter city who are often forced to move every single lease cycle because the rents go up so fast. And can't afford to buy a home, and so we have more houses that are being rented. Our neighborhoods are less stable, and we have a lot more people hanging on by a thread. Out in District 6 where I am, there are a lot of families with children living there, and they might have moved into an apartment when they could afford it, and they can't actually afford to move, and their car breaks down, and they can't afford to fix it, and now they're walking to where they need to go. And so Austin has some programs, that support people who are on the edge of losing housing, whether that is, to help someone make improvements on a home that they own that they might not otherwise be able to afford, to help renters who, may need a little bit of help, the utility programs, if you have an unusual situation. I fully support all those types of programs, and I think it is critical that Austin continues to provide those sorts of programs. Absolutely essential. Some of the other candidates were talking about homelessness and the causes, and maybe that will come for me, but one of the most important things is to prevent the loss of the home to begin with. So, whether that's owned or rented, I really support those programs. And then we also need to take the steps that will allow the cost of developing housing to be less expensive, more efficient, and also put some of this in greater reach of people who own their homes. The permitting process is very challenging for every single person who owns a home. And the way that things can get triggered and then delayed can make it really, cost prohibitive. When we're looking at the value of somebody's property, with the very expensive site development process that we have, it really limits what you can do with your property. And the site development plan, the site plan light program can help to address that, and that will allow people the current owners, the individuals, not just the big corporations, to be able to hold that wealth in their hands and do what they want to with their property.
Thank you. So, let's ask that question. What do you see as the primary cause of homelessness, and what are the most effective interventions required to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring?
Okay, so I think that it's extremely important, the cost of housing and the cost of transportation, housing plus transportation. So, the rates of homelessness track very directly with how expensive housing is. So that is definitely a critical component. We don't hear as much talk about the cost of transportation, but just to pull out one of the examples that I gave in my earlier question, if someone is struggling to make rent and their car breaks down and they can't get to work, so now they're paying for Ubers to get there, and there are genuinely District 6 families in this situation. Suddenly they can't make rent even more. So these costs of housing and transportation are really critical. And in the current climate, it will be very hard to deliver programs just from the city that would make so many of our households really be able to have affordability as an experience, but we certainly have to do everything that we can. Another piece of what causes homelessness is, unexpected expense that can't be covered. And so I like it that Austin provides some programs to help with that. Healthcare expenses are, of course, a big driver of that. But the other piece of it is not just having that expense come up, it's also what networks and resources do you have to handle it when it does come up. And that might mean like having friends or family or a city government or, nonprofits that can help get through, or churches or, other places of worship that can help you get through that bump in the road. But once you exhaust that, that's when homelessness starts. And then I would say the other, big piece is one of the best, most effective preventions of homelessness is to not allow that home to be lost in the first place. And so having programs, we talk a lot about programs that can support people who are already unhoused. And I hope that we can talk a lot also about programs that can help prevent people from becoming unhoused. District 6 is 90 to 95% Round Rock ISD, 60% Williamson County. It's an area where a lot of people like to think that this isn't an issue, but the rates of homelessness have been skyrocketing among Round Rock ISD students. And, when I meet with the people who run the programs for that and I ask, so what kind of person are we seeing? Who is this? Round Rock ISD students who are homeless are typically a mom and children without financial support coming in from anyone else. And they are often living in cars and moving from home to home, but have no permanent place to be. And the rates of that are increasing dramatically. And there just really aren't many resources up there for them. So,
thank you for that. I really wanted you to continue that in spite of our time up. But I do have another question for you. How would you balance the need for additional housing in high opportunity areas of Austin with existing residents' concerns regarding change?
So I am super thirsty, and I am going to ask Skip if you could bring me my water. Thank you. Okay, and do you mind just the last little bit of that? Okay.
I'll repeat it for you. How would you balance the need for additional housing in high opportunity areas of Austin with existing residents concerning regarding change?
So I've lived in my District 6 home for a decade, and before that I lived in 78704 before City Hall was built, and then in North Central Austin. And since I have lived in District 6, we are fairly disconnected from the rest of the city. We don't have good transportation connections. There's a lot of traffic. People from here don't get up there and vice versa. So I really hadn't made it into some of the central parts of the city that I am now in all the time since before the pandemic. And, I started coming to Austin when the Holly Power Plant was still operational. My mother-in-law lived near there. And so I have been seeing this. I mean, she wasn't my mother-in-law then, but I married someone I went to high school with. So I've been seeing Austin for a long time. And I very vividly remember when I drove into East Austin for the first time on this campaign, how shocked I was at the amount of change that has occurred so quickly. And I say all that as a prelude to say, I can understand why people are upset. Never does change like that happen that fast and not cause a lot of problems. I mean, we all in this room moved to an Austin that we loved when we moved here, and it's very different. And a lot of that change has already happened, but it is critically important, I would say, to almost everyone who lives in Austin to preserve the things that they love. And there are communities, it is so important to have deep roots in community. And that is one of the things that's breaking my heart about Austin right now. I didn't get to this part in my bio, but when I moved to Austin, I wanted a place that my kids would want to live, where there were jobs, and where they could afford it. And where, when my parents got old enough that they were willing to move to me, they could afford to. And none of those things are true in Austin. And that's why I'm running. I want to be a force for positive change. And so I really want to work through the mechanisms of, yes, zoning changes and, things that make our city more efficient so there's more money left for other things and that sort of thing. Yes. However, full stop, that is not going to address affordability. It is simply not. We need an Austin that is also going to find ways to invest us ourselves and also find federal money to help us with it to fill in so many other parts of the stair step of housing that's needed here. And we do need to prioritize programs that promote stability.
Final question.
Can I just say one more thing about that?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sure.
What I've been doing for the last few years, so my background, my professional background is as a real estate appraiser, and I specialized in the Austin housing market and also worked on roads and transportation projects for about a decade. But that's not what I've been doing for the last few years. The last few years, I've been doing community organizing. Round Rock ISD had an attempt by the Moms for Liberty to take over our school board, and I, to keep it brief, said, not my schools. No, I care about public schools too much. So I fought back on that. And one of the things that was amazing about that experience was that organization started as a little seed in my neighborhood, which is 54% Asian, and we had a Chinese trustee who received death threats in the height of COVID. But very quickly, we started collaborating with Round Rock Black parents on the total opposite side of the district, and I learned so much about effective communication that is two-way and ongoing, not one and done. And this is a really important part of how I would address some of the issues that seem to be very pervasive in the discussion of housing around displacement and what types of programs can be effective, but just also bring in my experience to try to then find effective solutions. I'm sorry, I went on a little longer.
That's okay. And
Apologies.
the final question is basically what you've already answered, and it'll give you a chance to elaborate a little bit. Over the last 3 years, the percentage of Black and brown individuals experiencing homelessness has increased drastically, and the numbers are growing. As Austin continues to grow economically, what is your plan to make sure the homeless population is minimized, and not only for Black and brown individuals, but for everyone?
Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to say flat out, this is a reason that I hope that all of you will support me in this room. I am running against Mackenzie Kelly, who certainly has a lot to say about homelessness, and some of it sounds quite nice. But in point of fact, what has actually happened as she has been on city council is District 6 has had the second fastest growth rate in homelessness in the city without our city council member advocating to add services and support. So it takes an hour to get across town to South Austin to someplace where there's lodging. You know, there's one food pantry that's walking distance from all of the multifamily that's near Lakeline Station. She ran and continues to run in our area on fear of homelessness. And I can tell you it is much more visible than it used to be. That is effective because we have encampments that we didn't used to have, and truly unhoused residents of District 6. This is their home. They are living in our woods, and they are walking to the highways, and then they are going to whatever support they can have and taking public transportation. But she runs on fear of it. So as long as people are scared of what's happening, she's raising money. She is not trying to fix that problem. She's trying to have it not be noticed that she's trying, that she's not actually trying to fix it, because she can raise more money the more it persists. I, on the other hand, never thought I'd run for office, and I'm not very practiced at this, but I'm running because I want effective solutions to the problems that face us. Our unhoused neighbors, like I said, they are our neighbors. They are living there now. I am not interested in a photo op, clean up trash, move everyone out of here, and then they're back. I'm not interested in police officers spending 70% of their time trying to get private property owners to do a trespass, I forgot the phrase that goes with it, but so that the people living there will be able to be arrested for trespassing, and then have them released and come back and do that over and over again. No, I am here for real solutions, and that means affordability. It also means effective collaboration. In District 6, we're 60% Williamson County, we're 40% Travis County. We have quite a large population right now, very few services, and we get forgotten about out there by Austin, by Travis County, by Williamson County, by the nonprofits who work on this issue, and they do it by county, but we're at their boundaries, so they're just not super active there. And then a lot of people have a feeling that we're a very wealthy part of town and that this isn't part of our district, and it is. We have people living all kinds of ways in our district, and I love working with people to find solutions to problems and bringing people together who weren't talking before to try to make things better. And that's really what's needed up in District 6 is someone who can bring those counties together and Austin and the school district that has a good program to connect with some of the programs that, Austin does a lot, the city of Austin does a lot to support AISD families that are struggling, but, 95% of our district is Round Rock ISD, and there isn't that level of collaboration and support for families. And I want to come into it as a positive force for getting things done. I'm not trying to raise all the money that's available from the right so I can continue my political career. Just saying.
Thank you, Crystal Lane, District 6. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. I know, this is out of order. Can I tell you a slight more about my bio, or should I just get off the stage? Okay, thank you. Okay, I just wanted to say, when I moved to Austin, I lived very central and I loved it. When I moved to District 6, and I found this used to be true in all of Austin, that it was accessible all over. I loved the access to nature. I wanted to be able to have my kids walk out the door to nature, and Central Austin has that too. But one of the big problems that I see right now is the way that traffic is and sprawl is, that's how we lose our access to nature in city, and that's one of my big motivations too.
Awesome, thanks. All right, we saved the best for last, District 10. This was not part of the script, but in 60 seconds or less, and we do have a timekeeper over here, by the way, why don't you give us the extended elevator speech, a little bit about yourself and why you're running. We'll start with you, Ashika.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. My name is Ashika Gangley. I'm running for Austin City Council District 10 in West Austin. I am a lifelong Austinite, grew up in this city, and I love this city. I'm a former public school teacher, and I currently work as the legislative director at the Texas Capitol. I got into policy work because of my time in the classroom. I saw very clearly just how much systemic policy really does affect our lives, our children's lives, and their families' lives. I got into working to get my master's degree in policy at UT, and I've been really fueled by my work at the state capitol to pursue changes at the local level to really affect positive changes for everyone's lives here in Austin.
Mark? Oh, probably need the mic.
Oh.
Does help. Hi, my name is Marc Duchin. I'm running for Austin City Council in District 10. My story is a little bit different. I'm the only candidate that's got 20 years of experience working in politics, advocacy, technology, and most recently running a business. But in terms of why I'm running, it's more simple. I'm running because I care deeply about the city that I've lived in for 28 years, this district that I've lived in for 24 years. And the reality is we haven't done a great job of making sure folks have been heard at City Hall in terms of things on land use, in terms of safety, in terms of spending, in terms of a lot of issues that impact people on a day-to-day basis, and making sure that they can afford to stay in this town. And so I've got also about a decade worth of civic experience working on different boards and commissions and working on a lot of local issues, everything from homelessness, transit, land use, and other issues. And I'm the only candidate that's ready to hit the ground running. The reality is our challenges are big and they're immediate, and there is no time for a learning curve, and I'm looking forward to jumping straight in after our council member is done after November. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Just keep the mic. We'll start with you for this one. And for these questions, we'll have 2 minutes to respond. First question we're going to ask you tonight is something we've asked every candidate. We've heard a lot of really fascinating answers, and I find it to be a very intriguing question. And it's, why did you decide to live where you live? And how does that influence your beliefs on housing or inform how you advocate on certain housing policies?
Well, I was incredibly fortunate to be able to have a house in a condo in West Austin over 20 years ago. And I've since joined the board about 10 years ago. But what's interesting about our property and our community of about 180 units and about 300 or so residents is we're middle income Austin. You know, most of those folks bought 20 years ago when those units were $150,000. And so we've got folks that are aging in place. We've got folks that are raising families. It's a really good cross-section of who's here and who wants to stay here if they can, and if we can make sure that the city's available for them to stay here. And there's been a lot of changes there in that community over the last 20 years that I've tracked in terms of taking care of folks as far as, again, mobility, infrastructure, safety. One of the things that we've instituted that I think is really relevant for this conversation is we have what's called a scheduled maintenance program on our property. And what that means is we're trying to completely repair 2 to 3 buildings every single year as a way to maintain the property. And that's significant for this conversation in particular because if we don't, it means there will be a time when those owners have to eventually pay what will be millions or tens of millions of dollars to try and essentially scrape and have new buildings there. So the more that we can squeeze value out of existing assets is a huge takeaway from my experience there. And a big part of why I feel like that should be part of the conversation for housing also. The more that we can maintain existing stock and extend the life of it means that we're not going to scrape it and then build expensive market rate or luxury housing that replaces it that nobody here can afford. So again, it's a middle income community that we are extending the life of so people can stay. And that's part of the reason that I enjoy working on that association. And it's part of the vision and takeaway that I have from that experience that we can take, I think, to other places in Austin and say, let's figure out how to extend the assets of our neighborhoods and our dwellings so that people can continue to stay and afford to live in Austin rather than scrape and rebuild at market rate units.
Thanks, Marc. Ashika?
So I also live in a condo complex. I live in a 12-unit condo complex in Tarrytown. I chose to live there when I graduated college and I started working as a classroom teacher because it was 5 minutes away from my school. When I left the classroom and went to grad school, it was 10 minutes away from UT campus. When I left grad school and started working at the Capitol, it was still 10 minutes away from the Capitol. So I love where I live because I'm able to live in a desirable neighborhood, in a diverse housing option, with walkable streets, tree-lined streets, a quiet residential feel, but still be just a hop away from all of the amenities that make my life positive, no matter what phase of life I've been in at the time. I live 5 minutes from downtown, from the Town Lake Trail, from all my favorite restaurants, and yet I still get to enjoy this neighborhood that I love. I want this option to be available to more people. I believe that everyone in Austin deserves to live in our urban core and deserves to be able to enjoy all the amenities that our city has to offer, no matter what stage of life that they are in.
Thank you so much. We'll start with you on this one, Ashika. How do you see recent changes to the land development code, including home, changes to occupancy limits, elimination of parking minimums, and ETOD overlays impacting your district, District 10? If elected, would you revisit any of these policies, and are there any other land development code changes you would explore?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, thinking about the neighborhoods in District 10 and the policies put in place, my gut feeling is that, and based on my conversations with folks, is that we won't see a huge material change in the district due to things like deed restrictions and HOA ordinances. However, where it can be effective is in small neighborhoods and in residential streets, creating more missing middle housing like duplexes, triplexes, and small multifamily developments. I think increases to the occupancy limits definitely make different housing options in different neighborhoods more available to students, to young professionals, to folks like myself when I was graduating college and wanted to continue to live in West Austin where I was born and raised. I do intend to revisit the policy as needed when on the dais. I really believe that policy is a living process and that there's no such thing as a perfect policy. So I would want to continue to engage with stakeholders and with the community and with residents in District 10 to make it fit their needs and the city's needs as much as it can. Especially with regards to environmental protection. So thinking about our tree line, thinking about our watershed, and then with regards to displacement. I definitely don't want to see any sort of development happening where we're pushing out folks that cannot afford to continue to live in their house and then replacing an existing affordable housing option with more expensive, denser options.
So of all the policies you mentioned, I think home is going to have the greatest impact on our District 10. And I really see opportunities to revisit and improve it really along three main areas. One is infrastructure, one is affordability, and one is the environmental impacts of it. And I'll start in reverse order. The environmental impacts, we're talking about things like impervious cover. We're going to have upwards of 65% impervious cover on lots with 3 units. That's going to change everything from flood mitigation, other issues. It's also going to mean setbacks, mean trees come down. We've already heard stories of concrete being laid and destroying live oak trees. And so that's one thing I'd like to see addressed. I think affordability, there was the opportunity for an equity overlay that would have meant people wouldn't have been displaced to the degree that I think they will be and gentrified. And so making sure that we can try and get that entertained so we can protect people, particularly vulnerable people that are in East Austin. And I think the infrastructure ones are also paramount. We're talking about everything from emergency vehicle access. We're talking about the trees and the tree canopy and heat index. We're talking about water. We're talking about parking and trash. So I think those are all opportunities. And in terms of other things that we can do regarding policies to help with housing and housing affordability in particular, I think there's a lot of other places that we can turn to. One thing I asked council at the end of last year during phase 1 was, what about short-term rentals? That's potentially upwards of 18,000 or more units that could be available for homeownership. And they said, well, we'll get to it in 2024. And here we are working our way through 2024, and we still haven't gotten to it yet. So there's also institutional investment in single-family homes that are also taking homes off the market, driving up home values for all of us in this room. And I think there's also just revisiting permitting, particularly for the small and medium end builders. I think there's a lot of ways that we can reduce costs there and increase efficiency so that homes are built faster and get on the market quicker, and that'll reduce housing affordability. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to go micless and project. I assume everyone can hear me.
Well, actually, no, I need to record.
Okay, all right. Take this. Next question. I think we're going to start with you, Mark, on this one. In 2018, and you might have heard this if you just heard the D7 debate or D7 responses. In 2018, the City of Austin released the Strategic Housing Blueprint, which was a 10-year plan for addressing our community's housing needs. The blueprint calls for a goal of 8,456 affordable units in D10 over 10 years. Housing Works keeps a scorecard to track progress in each district towards its goals. The latest scorecard, released 2 years ago, shows that District 10 is 0.4% of the way towards the goal, with just 31 units created at the 5-year mark, or 4-year mark at that time. In fact, District 10 is at the very bottom for least number of affordable units created. Are you satisfied with the district's progress towards achieving the benchmarks laid out in the blueprint? If not, what would you do to get the district back on track towards meeting its goals?
So I'm deeply unsatisfied with the progress that's been made towards the housing blueprint goals. The creation of 31 is just rather pathetic, and there's got to be other ways that we can make sure that we can get more units. I think having low-income housing, particularly in Northwest Austin, West Austin, a place with good schools is a way to help break the cycle of poverty and change the culture of that part of town. That said, our challenge is the market. It will always be the market, and the challenge is that we have some of the most expensive land in the entire city. I've worked with a couple of different realtors, and when you look at the housing price index for a home of 3 units, we're talking about a multiplier relative to the rest of the city of over 3x. That's what the land and home values are out there, and that's why it's very expensive to get affordable units built. In terms of what we can do, we need to make sure that we are making sure that developers aren't opting out with fee in lieu, that they're actually building on-site affordable units at a decently low MFI that people can afford to stay in. We're talking about making sure that MFI, when it's used, it's rated to the cost of building actual units out there. And then 2 other things I'll say real quick are, you guys might have caught a couple of days ago, Austin Raleigh has about 4 big buildings that they're trying to figure out how to get in the market. And even just selling one of those buildings will create a lot of cash that we could use to make sure that we are investing in affordable housing units. And we have the places in West Austin, near Wood Hollow, near other places that have transit and existing density. So there are opportunities. And then finally, there's the, trying to leverage the 2022 affordable housing bond, which is about 6% expended at this point. So there's plenty of resources there also to make sure that we can try and really make a concerted effort to get more options across the board in West Austin.
I am also not satisfied with the progress that we've made in District 10, knowing that only 31 families have been able to move into the district in the last 5 years is really, really abysmal. I know that West Austin has a certain connotation to folks, and I know that I'm just a regular person trying to live my life in this district, and other folks deserve to be able to do the same thing too. I think that if we could work on reducing regulatory barriers, whether that's streamlining the permitting process and having a flexible and responsive land development code that is responsive to the needs of our growing city each year, we could definitely work on increasing our affordable housing stock, also expanding public-private partnerships to work with developers, to work with nonprofits, and to work as a city to increase that stock as well. And then finally, to increase the level of community awareness and engagement, just to change the attitude around affordable housing in Austin and West Austin in particular. Median family income in the city of Austin is $110,000 right now. That's so high. And so when we're talking about affordable housing, these are regular working class families that we are talking about. These are our teachers, these are our nurses, these are our firefighters. We need to have economic diversity in different neighborhoods in Austin, and I believe that we are able to do that in District 10.
We'll start with you again on this one, Ashika. I think we have time for 2 more questions. D10 is home to a lot of high opportunity neighborhoods, high opportunity areas. How would you balance the need of additional housing in these high opportunity areas where the good jobs are, the good schools, the good everything, versus the existing residents' concerns regarding change?
I think that's a great question and very prevalent in this district in particular. In my experience, and this is mostly anecdotal evidence, but this district is home to the most number of longtime Austin residents out of the different areas of Austin. So a lot of folks in this district have lived here their entire lives, 20 years or more, and have a deep stake in the culture of this city, which I do as well. So when I'm talking about growth, I'm really talking about sustainable and responsible growth in these neighborhoods. I'm future focused. I'm born and raised in this city. I know where we've been and I know where we're going, and I want to be part of the solutions for that. When talking about balancing the needs of our city with the attitudes of the neighborhoods, I really want to pursue more missing middle options, our duplexes, our triplexes, our small multifamily developments, so we can continue to preserve our neighborhood identity while also increasing the number of units on the market. I talk a lot about how where I live in Terrytown, below Enfield, just south of Enfield, there's quite a bit of dense housing, whether it's condo complexes, apartment complexes, or duplexes, triplexes. And it bleeds very naturally into the single-family home area of Terrytown. And so it really does not affect the neighborhood identity at all to have denser development centered in different areas. So especially with recent changes like ETOD, where we're incentivizing development and denser housing in certain areas, I think that we can continue to preserve the things that we love about Austin, keep Austin, Austin, while also making room for more folks. I also believe in supply and demand in the housing market. My opponent serves on the board of Community Not Commodity, an organization that has come out as not believing in supply and demand in the housing market. So I believe that the more units we have, the more people will be able to afford to live here, and the more Austin will thrive.
So I'll talk about a story instead. The story, and this is a story in some ways of how I got involved in local politics again. And the story is about something called the Austin Oaks PUD. That's a development that sits out on the corner of Mopac and Spicewood Springs Road. And it speaks to a central challenge that we've had, which is there's not a great community engagement process, which I think is the center of this question. And we had to have a charrette that was guided by the developers to try and get the neighbors and different interest groups together to try and figure out how to manage that process for that PUD. But I'll tell you, of concern to us was a traffic impact analysis that we had, the city produced, that showed that there'd be 50,000 trips per day on Spicer Springs Road alone with that PUD. And that's a road that's already, if you ever drive on it, is already at capacity between probably 4 and 6 p.m., as well as in the mornings. There's a fire station that's right on that road that already has to turn on their lights just to get through traffic. And that's the only point of entry and egress for my entire community. And so that was a real problem for us because we saw the city's plan was to invest $250,000 into upgrading 2 intersections. And there was no data to suggest that would anywhere accommodate 50,000 trips per day. I think the moral of the story here is that we need a better engagement process across the board to make sure that neighborhoods and residents and people can get their infrastructure issues addressed, to make sure that we can balance the kind of growth and development that we do, because there are opportunities to build and there are opportunities to increase density currently right now on the Austin Oaks PUD. They have that ability through the PUD itself. That said, a lot of it is simply an engagement process that we are struggling with, in terms of everything from basic notification to making sure that there's a good process for city officials, for developers, for the people, the development community to come and engage with owners and residents and make sure that we can build the kind of community benefits and amenities that we need to have really thriving neighborhoods with different housing options.
Thanks, Mark. We'll stick with you for this last question. Something else the city is struggling with, many other cities, not unique to Austin, are those experiencing homelessness. What do you see as the primary cause of, or causes of homelessness, and what are the most effective interventions required to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring?
I think homelessness is one of the most challenging issues we face. I think so many other American cities have struggled with this issue. I think one of the challenges in particular that we've struggled with are simply connecting metrics and outcomes and dollars. And when you look at the audit that was initiated 3 years ago, it did a great job of talking about how much money we spend, but not connecting to system flow and beds and PSH and so on. When we look at what the ECHO housing dashboard shows every day, which has been down for 3 years, but is finally back up this year, it's the opposite. It tells you what system flow and beds are, but it doesn't connect us to the dollars that we spend. So there's a lot of people like myself that are trying to figure out, simply from a public perspective, how do we make sure that we're creating value for people? How do we make sure we're serving people in the best way? We've elected to build a lot of PSH units that are, in some ways, very expensive. They're 3 times more expensive than prevention. They're 5 times more expensive than shelter beds. There are other programs that do PSH incredibly well. For some reason, we've elected not to pursue that model. I'm talking about programs like New Hope Housing in Houston. They've got over 1,600 beds themselves as an individual nonprofit. And I'd encourage anybody that's curious about this issue to take a look at that model and see how it works. They fund operations through federal housing tax credits. They fund capital projects through the philanthropic community in Houston, and they're putting 500 more units online in the next 2 years. That's a model that we could pursue, and for some reason we've resisted. And so I think there's plenty of other options. I mean, this is, in terms of underlying issues, it's also talking about figuring out how do you deal with folks that have comorbidities? How do you deal with folks that have substance abuse and mental health? There's roughly 20% of the homeless population that is struggling and that will always probably need some degree of government or nonprofit care, because they're the folks that were turfed out during the 1980s when we shut down institutions. And they're the folks that have those comorbidities and have those challenges. And so there's always got to be a system for that, and I think that's where PSH can be really valuable, and the data shows that. But there's also folks that are homeless for other reasons, for family dynamic reasons, for economic reasons, and that's where I think we can make other strides too.
So this issue is really near and dear to my heart. When I was in the classroom at Matthews Elementary in Clarksville, we were the homeschool for the Salvation Army homeless shelter at the time. So every year I had anywhere from 5 to 10 kiddos that were going in and out of transient situations or unhoused situations in and out of my classroom. I got to know these kids and their parents and their families very well and see firsthand what it's like going through homelessness. I think what we forget a lot as policymakers is that these are people first that we're dealing with, and it's not just a beds and bodies situation. It is a holistic situation that we need to look at. So I think I'm really interested in looking at putting more effort into preventative homeless services. There are lots of studies to show that if we can catch someone within the first 10 days of living on the streets or before they live on the streets on the brink of homelessness, they're much more likely to make it into permanent housing. So I'd like to see the city spend less money on the back end in these emergency shelter situations and more preventative policies. I also think that mental health and substance abuse disorders play a really pivotal role in homeless services. So we need to, yes, invest in housing first policies, but also have the wraparound services to match that so that these housing policies are actually successful. I also think that there's a larger question of housing and economic instability at play here too. We know that affordable housing issues for our middle income or high income families have a trickle down effect, ending up with more folks on the streets. So if we are addressing housing for our middle income families, we're also creating more opportunities for folks to get off the streets.
Thanks so much. That wraps it up. I'll turn it back over to Abby for some closing remarks. Appreciate you both coming out with us tonight.
All right, well, thank y'all so much for sticking around. That was a really long evening, but I hope everybody feels like they learned a lot and maybe learned about some candidates that are in their district or mayoral candidates. Again, this event was put on by the Austin Housing Coalition, Housing Works Austin, and AIA Austin. I think Austin Housing Coalition is the only membership-based organization that you don't have to be a professional architect or working in the housing policy space, but we'd love to have you. If housing is something that you're passionate about, please come talk to me about how you can become a member. And again, thanks again to RISA Foundation and AIA Austin for sponsoring this event. Thanks to Assembly Hall for being an awesome group putting on this event, and have a great evening. Oh, one more thing. Thanks to the Habitat Restore for letting us borrow these chairs.